Hi, welcome back to this series. Great to have you back on board again. In this video, we'll do some cleanup work. We'll make sure that our schema and our resolvers do have clean code, that it's reusable, easy to maintain, and also that we fix one bug, which I introduced in the past. So let's dive in. Let's actually start with that bug, which I have here in my resolvers. There, I do actually return my events at some point. Let me quickly find that. Here, in my events function up there, I do return my events, and I want to return my mapped events here. Now, the problem, of course, is that map returns a new array. And therefore, if I return events here, I'm not returning my mapped array, I still return the old events. So what I should do here really is I should just return events map up there and get rid of that return events statement down there. So this was the one bug which I wanted to fix. Now I also want to work on code reusability and optimize this code a little bit. Because, for example, one thing I'm doing is when I'm mapping my event, I'm always doing the same steps. I spread the event doc fields, I then replace the ID, I replace the date, I replace the creator. Now, I do this up there, and if we scroll down a little bit, I do the same thing here, for example. And I might have another place where I do it as well. So in the end, here, for example. So in the end, what I want to do, I want to kind of standardize this. I want to create a function where I simply pass my event object in and which returns me that transformed event object so that I can simply call this function in all the places where I need to transform my event. And for this, I will again add a function here in this resolver, and I will name this function transform event. You can name it however you want, but I in the end want to put in an event and get an event out, just an event which has all the fields I need. And therefore there we'll have an argument, which is basically the event I want to change. You can name it however you want. I will name it event here. So I pass in that event argument, and I simply want to return a new object, which is basically this object here. So where I map my event into something new. So I will return this object. Event is the name I was using there too, so I can actually leave all the code I have in there. Now I can call transform event here, where I return this. I can simply call transform event and pass in my event. Now, event here, of course, refers to this event, not to this event up there, which is a local variable available in this function. So I can call transform event here. And let's see, where else do we need it? Well, here, where I return a single event, there I should also return my transformed event. So let's call transform event and pass in the event there too. Let's return it here. For the user, I don't need that. There I'm binding my created events to the events function, which is fine. Here, where I then have this events resolver, there I also return my event like this. I don't want to return it like this. Instead, here I want to have the same logic as before. I want to call transform event and pass in that event. If I scroll down to bookings, there, this is fine for now. Create event, there, again, I'm transforming my event here, and I don't want to do that. So here, just as I did it before, I will call transform event, and here this is named result. So we'll pass in result, but still this will call this transform event function where I do pull out my ID and so on. So I do that down there when I create an event now. Here. Now let's move on and let's see if I'm doing this anywhere else. When I book an event, we're using this differently. When I cancel an event, here again, there I have my booking, and the booking has an event field, and then I do all the same transformations with that. So here I also want to call transform event, and I pass in booking.event. By the way, if you're wondering why I'm using booking.event and not booking._event, this would work too actually, but the fields of an entity which is stored in the database, are always available on the top level element 2. The underscore doc field is just special in the sense of this is then just that data we stored in the database with no metadata. On the top level, we got the stored data and the metadata. And I don't want to return the metadata when I return the response. Therefore, always I dig into the document there. If I just want to pull out one element, which I then use somewhere else, in this case in the transform event function, it's fine to access this on the top level. So with that, let's save that and let's see if this still works. In my database, I currently have no bookings. I have a couple of events and I have one user or two users actually. So let's create a new event now, shall we? Let's test this first. So we'll have a mutation where I create an event. The event input is passed, and there, well, you know what we need, a title. After refactoring the description, this should still work. The price, $9.99. Whoops, should be a float though, $9.99. And the date for this, I'll again use my developer tools. New date to ISO string, and then simply grab that string and use this here as a date. And now for the generated event, I want to get the ID. I want to get the creator email address. If I hit enter, doesn't look too bad. So this was an event being created. Let me now query for my events. So here I will search for events. And for each event, I want to get the title. And I want to get the creator email address. And to be really fancy, let's also get the created events IDs then. If I now hit enter, this goes ahead and executes the query. And there I get my events, get testing, which is from this user who created all these events there. And get another event after refactoring of this user who has two events who he created. So this doesn't look too bad. Let's now also book an event. So for this, I will actually change this query here and get the ID for all my events rather than the creator data. So let's now maybe book this event here. So let's add a mutation. Book an event. The event ID should be this ID. And then we can get information about the booking, for example, about the user, get the email address of the user. Doesn't look too bad. Now with that, finally, I just want to cancel that booking. So I'll grab that ID here, cancel booking. The booking ID is this ID. And what we get back here is the event which we canceled, and that was the testing event. So this now all works with that refactoring in place, but of course we can do more. For example, what we also can do here is this date thing. I'm always doing the same transformation to my dates, right? I pass it into the date constructor, and then here I call to ISO string. Of course, we could create a helper for this. And now, since this is not really a helper related only to the events, I will create a separate helper folder here, or maybe named helpers. And in there, I want to have my date.js file, because we could have more date-related helper functions. I will only export one here. I'll use that other exports syntax Node.js offers, so not module exports, but exports, and then we can assign a name and store something in there. So here I'll have my date to string helper, let's say. And this shall be a function where I get a date and where I then simply return new date with that date being passed in to ISO string. So a really simple function that just takes a date and transforms it to an ISO string. And now we can import that into the resolver file here. So here I'll have my object, which I'll get from this helpers folder, from the date file there. And this is a JavaScript object, and I can use object destructuring to pull out that date to string field and store it in a separate constant here in this resolvers file. And now I can use date to string as a function in all these places here. So there, where I pass in event.date, I can use date to string just like this, and it should still work. And we can do that in all the places where we have a new date in here. So here, for example, there I want to use date to string, and get rid of to isostring at the end, of course. And we have another occurrence down there. Here, there I also want to use date to string and replace that with this. So now, just a quick check here. Let's run a simple query where I get all events and let's get their dates. I still get the right format, but now I'm using my helper function, which allows us to, well, put all that logic into one place. One other thing we can do is, just as we created this transform event function for, well, centralizing this transformation logic we have for every event we're working with, we can do the same for bookings. Because if you have a look at the bookings, here I'm transforming my booking, and I'm also doing the same a little bit further down. Here, this is also my booking. So it would make sense to also put that into a dedicated function. Transform booking seems like a fitting name since I named the other one transform event. There I'll get my booking data or my booking object. And here I want to return the transformed object. So let's scroll down to the place where we do transform it. Here, let's cut that from there and move it up here. And I already named it booking here, so this code will continue to work. I use booking there to pull out all the things and transform all the things I want to transform. And therefore, we can now simply call transform booking in the place where I cut this here. Transform booking and pass in the single booking to apply the transformation. And do the same when we create a booking, when we book an event. There, I also do all these transformations. Here, I do it on the result because the result here is my booking, but still I can call transform booking and simply pass in the result there. Now, let's see that. If I take any event, quickly fetch the ID here. Let's say that one. And I then again book it. So I'll add my mutation and book the event with this ID here. Let's quickly get the booking ID. That seems to work. Let's book again and now output the updated add date. This also works. And let's now run another query where we get all the bookings. And there I want to have the event title, let's say, and the event date. And I want to have the updated add date for the booking itself. If I run this, this also looks good. The dates look good to me. Booking data seems to be retrieved correctly. I seem to have 2 bookings. Let's cross-validate in our MongoDB Explorer here. Looks good too. So now we will optimize this a bit as well. The final thing I want to do for now is I want to split my resolvers so that I don't have this one huge resolver file, but that I instead have multiple files where every file has its own responsibility. For example, it would make sense to have an, let's say, events resolver, which takes care about the event creation, event querying, and then have a booking resolver, which is responsible for booking events and canceling bookings. So to split this up, all I have to do is I have to move my logic over into these files, which is a bit of copy and pasting for now. So here I will, for example, use that date to string thing, which I will need in both files, and I will import it in both files, therefore. I will also need the event model here, obviously in my events file. So I will import it here. And now what I have to do here is I need to export an object with all my event-related resolvers. So I can go down to my module export here and simply grab it entirely, maybe, that whole module exports, and then I'll just remove what I don't need. So copy that whole module exports from index.js, move it into events.js, and now there, I won't need the cancel booking functionality, so we can get rid of that. I don't need book event because I want to handle that in the booking resolver. I won't need create user, of course, because no users should be created here. I want to be able to create an event here. I don't need to be able to retrieve my bookings here, so we can get rid of that. I want to be able to retrieve my events though. And of course, since I referenced transform event here, I want to move that into that file too. So I'll cut transform event from index.js and move that into events.js. So move that into there. So now I have that in here. But there, of course, I do reference that user function. You might remember that user function, which in the end allows us to populate our user data on demand. And actually, all these population functions, events, single event, and user, they will be used by our different resolver parts, you could say. So we should outsource them into a separate file from which we can import in all the other resolvers so that we don't have to cross-import and create infinite loops from our different resolver files. So for this, there are different ways of setting this up. You could move this in the helpers file. I want to keep it in the resolvers folder because in the end this is resolver related, but I will create a new file in there and maybe name this merge.js because the functionality in there is about merging data, but you can name this differently, of course. And in that merge.js file, I will add my three functions up there, events, single event, and user. I will cut it from the index.js file here and move it into the merge.js file. And then there, I simply want to export that. So we'll add an export, which is named user, which points at that user function I have here. I will have an export which is named events, which points at that events function I defined up there. And of course, I'll also have my single event here. So I'll name exports single event. I'll add this too and point at my single event. So now I export all that in the merge.js file, and this means we can import it, for example, in the events.js file. There, we'll again use object destructuring. I'll require my merge file here. And here in this file, I want to retrieve my user so that I can still use this user function. Now I'm importing this here so I can use it. And do I need something else here? Got transform event in here. Rest should be fine. So we'll need the other functionalities in our other files. I will also add an off.js file or user.js, however you want to name it, which is responsible for creating users and so on. So now events seems to be finished. Let's now go back to index.js, where I already removed some things. Now I want to remove my event-related things there too. So the event-related resolvers, create event. I don't need that here anymore because I have that in my events.js file in my resolvers folder. The other parts stay there. So let's now copy that entire file content maybe, move it into bookings.js and replace that import with it. I won't need bcrypt in there. I won't need event and user in here. But I will need the booking model and I will need date to string because I'm using it here. Got transform booking. And one other thing I need here is I need the single event and I need the user functions, which I export in my merge file. So here I will import that. Again, we'll use string interpolation. Let's require merge here, this merge.js file. And then in there, let's grab the single event and the user function, which I'm using here and here. And now if I go down to the resolver, we certainly need the bookings, right? Because that is what this file is all about. We won't need create user. That is not the responsibility of this file. We will need to be able to book an event. So that is something we do need here. And I also want to be able to cancel a booking. So I'll leave that in here too. So now this is my updated resolver for bookings. Now let's go back to index.js. And there, let's now get rid of transform booking. We don't need it here. Let's get rid of bookings and of book event and cancel booking. And all that is left is the create user functionality. So we'll now cut the entire content from index.js and move it into off.js. There, however, I don't need date to string, I don't need the booking model, I don't need the event model, so we can remove that. I will need bcrypt, I will need the user model because I am creating my user here, but that is it. That is all I need here. So now with that, I split up all my resolvers. The question now, of course, is how do I get them back together? Because splitting them up is nice, but we need to have one resolver root value object, which we then pass to app.js to this root value field. And I'm importing GraphQL resolvers from my index file in that resolvers folder, and that file is empty now, which is certainly not what I can import. Well, it's pretty easy to make this work. In the index.js file, in the resolvers folder, I need to import my individual resolver pieces, which I have in the separate files. So we'll add a couple of imports here. For example, the auth resolver, which I require from the auth file. And then I'll repeat that for my two other resolvers. So of course here I have the events resolver from the events file, and I have the booking resolver from the booking file. Now, keep in mind, in every file, I have this module exports syntax where I export one object, which has a couple of fields, which has my different resolver functions, basically. Now, since I will now merge them into one global object, we must, of course, ensure that we have no naming clashes, so that we never use a name twice. And that is true for GraphQL in general. It doesn't know namespaces. Every resolver fits a field in the schema, and therefore you have to avoid duplication there. Nested fields are, of course, okay, but on the top level, here, if we have bookings and book event, then of course we can only have them once because in the schema we also only have bookings and book event. So here we can't have bookings twice, for example. So that is what you have to keep in mind and what we have in our resolvers anyways. So now I'm just importing these different objects, and all I do in the index.js file, I now merge them into one root resolver. So I'll name this root resolver here, and this will now be a JavaScript object. And there I will use the spread operator to spread all the fields, so all the resolver functions, of my auth resolver into it, of my events resolver, and of my booking resolver. And now I will simply export this root resolver. And that is what I therefore will import in app.js. I export it here. In app.js, I do import it, and therefore I correctly assign it here and I can use it. Let's quickly see if that really works. So for that, one final round of playing around. Let's get the bookings. Event is not defined. Here we already got an error. Yeah. In book event, I use the event model to find an event, but I'm not importing it. So good thing we're testing. Here I need the event model indeed, so let's require it in this file from the event file in the models folder. But we'll also have a different problem, which I just realized. In my merge.js file, there, I also, of course, I use the event model and so on. So I need to import this here too. So let's import event by requiring it from the models folder, and they are from the event file. And of course, I don't just work with the event model here. I also work with the user model. So I should import this as well. So let's import user by requiring that from models user. And one other thing I can do, that events function here, I'm actually only using it in the merge file. I'm using it for the user here, there. And therefore, we don't actually have to export this. We can comment this out. Right now, we're not needing this anywhere else. If we later need it in another file, we can, of course, add this and make sure we do export it. But now I only use events internally. But now with that, let's run this again. Transform event is not defined. Makes sense. Of course, I am transforming some events there too, here. So I should make sure I have this imported there too. And since I have that in the events resolver file, I will actually grab that and add this to my merge.js file as well. Let me restructure this. Let's add transform event in here. Now there I use that user function So I won't need to export this anymore. And actually now we'll change the way this works in general. I could have, of course, also imported transform event from the events file in the booking file, but I now want to centralize this. So I'm not exporting my helper functions. I'll just export transform event and also transform booking. Let me grab that, add it to merge, add this here, and now add exports. Transform event will point at the transform event constant which holds that function, and exports transform booking will of course point at that transform booking function here. Now I have these merging functions in the merge.js file. There I use the user, single event, and events indirectly function which I define in there. And now in events.js, where I remove this, I just have to import this. So we'll import transform event here from merge. Don't need date to string there anymore because I'm now doing this in merge. Therefore, I need it here though. So I should import date to string by using object destructuring. I should import that from my top level helpers folder and there the date file. So now I'm using date to string in the merge.js file because here I now have my transform functions where I am using that date to string logic. In events.js, I now import transform event from merge, and in booking.js, I now can get rid of date to string, and from merge, I will import transform booking and transform event because I am using both in that file. Okay, so that was again a rather big restructuring, but I think it makes more sense in this way. Let's now run this again. This now looks better. We got our bookings. Let's also get our events here, maybe the ID and the title and the date and the creator, there the email and which other events this creator created. Let's hit enter for this quite complex query. And no error, this looks good. So this now all seems to work. And now, whilst this was a video full of restructuring only, we have a cleaner structure and we have a structure which now makes it easier to work with our code, since we now have nice chunks of code focused on certain responsibilities instead of having this one huge resolver file. And therefore, we now get the structure with which I now want to continue to add authentication as a next step.